Hello! Welcome everyone. Today I'm going to make chicken nuggets. This is a recipe I adapted from MacKenzie Lopez Alt, which I think he got from somewhere else. It's super easy, great for kids if you have kids, and it's highly customizable, so you can make it however you want. So let's get into it. Alright, the first thing I'm going to do is address kind of the secret ingredient, which is going to be a can of chickpeas. Chickpeas are great for this. They're not really going to contribute that much flavor or anything like that, but what they do is if you mash them up and put them in there, they keep the texture super tender, so it's really hard to mess these up. So I'm just going to drain those. I'm not going to bother rinsing them or anything like that. It doesn't really matter. And then I'm going to use a potato masher to mash those up. I want to get them into a pretty fine texture. I don't want like huge chunks or whole chickpeas in this. If a few big chunks sneak by, it's really not a big deal, but I'm trying to get it mostly as fine as I can. You could probably just do this step in a food processor if you wanted to. I'm just doing it by hand today because I don't feel like getting the food processor out just for this. Okay, so once those are mashed up, I'm going to put them into the bowl of my stand mixer. And then along with that, I'm going to do 1 pound of ground chicken. So that's kind of the ratio we're working with here is 1 pound of ground chicken to 1 can of chickpeas. So now the only other mandatory ingredient that you need to add to this is probably salt, so make sure you add plenty of that, and then you can do really whatever mix-ins you want with this. The only thing I would stay away from is anything too wet. Don't put in any like super melty cheeses or anything like that, but otherwise you should be fine. So I'm just going to add the salt, and I'm also going to do a good amount of black pepper, and then a few cloves of garlic that I'm going to mince up really fine. If you want to do this on the microplane, that would be a good option too. And then I'm also going to put in probably about 1/4 of a yellow onion. I would say the only rules are nothing too wet, so no like sauces or like super melty cheeses. And also make sure you chop everything up really fine, especially like with something like onions. When they're inside the nuggets, they're not going to have a ton of time to cook directly. So you got to make sure they're really fine, or else you're going to have like kind of raw chunks of onion in your final product, and you don't want that. So I'm going to get that into as fine of a dice as I can. I got half the onion here, so like I said, I think I'm just going to do about half of that. And then in addition to the fresh garlic that I added, I'm also going to add some garlic powder to this. In my opinion, fresh garlic and garlic powder are just two completely different ingredients. They're not interchangeable with one another, they're just totally different and serve different purposes. So like fresh garlic, we all know what fresh garlic does. It brings that bright allium kind of thing. Garlic powder in this context is just gonna aid in creating that backbone of like kind of savoriness to the whole thing. So it's just gonna give the nuggets a little bit more depth, a little bit more warmth. And then the only other thing I'm gonna add here is going to be some parsley. So just like with the other ingredients, I'm going to get that into a pretty fine chop. I'm not as worried about this as I am with like the onions, because parsley's thin, it's not going to have any trouble cooking all the way through, but I still don't want like huge whole leaves of anything in there because they're chicken nuggets. That's not what they're there for. So now I'm going to put that on the stand mixer, and this is kind of the beauty of this recipe with the chickpeas, is that I can do this on the stand mixer. You don't have to, you can definitely do this by hand, but the nice thing about the chickpeas is that it kind of makes it so that you can't really overwork this. So if it was just ground chicken, if you work this until everything was like totally combined and like homogeneous, it would end up having kind of a sausage texture, which a little bit of that springiness is going to be good for chicken nuggets, but we don't want this to just be a sausage, you know? We want them to still retain some sort of tenderness, and that's what the chickpeas provide. So that looks good to me there after a couple minutes in the stand mixer. So now I'm gonna portion these out. I'm gonna get my scale out just so I know kind of how big I'm making these. I'm just kind of eyeballing how big I want a chicken nugget to be, really. But for the sake of reference, this first one that I made is going to be about 1.5 ounces. So I'm going to shoot for about that size with the rest of them. So the first thing I'm going to do when portioning these out is I'm just going to roll them into balls, which again, they don't have to be like super tight or super uniform or anything. Just get it into relatively regularly sized chunks of meat, and then we'll deal with the rest. So now that I have them portioned all out, I'm going to go back around and kind of flatten them out. Okay, so once those are all flattened out, I'm going to throw the whole tray into the freezer. I'm not trying to freeze them, but keeping them cold will just make them easier to handle later. So I'm going to throw them into the freezer for about 10 or 15 minutes, which will give me a perfect amount of time to make the sauce for the chicken nuggets, which today I'm going to be making a kind of remoulade style sauce. At its heart, this dish is a fried chicken dish, and remoulade is the only fried chicken sauce that matters, in my opinion, so that's what I'm going to make. So the first thing that I'm going to start with is going to be a cup of mayonnaise, and then next is going to go Dijon mustard. I like a lot, so I'm going to do, I think, about 3 tablespoons of it. You can do more or less to your tastes. And then in goes maybe about a teaspoon or 2 of Worcestershire sauce, and then a pretty equal amount of some Louisiana style hot sauce. I'm using Tabasco today, but you can use Louisiana hot sauce, you can use Crystal, anything in that kind of ballpark. And then in goes paprika, cayenne, salt, and pepper. And now I'm going to scoot that over a little bit because now it's time for the ingredients that involve some amount of chopping. So first is going to be the juice of half a lemon. And then I'm going to do a couple cloves of garlic that I'm going to mince up really fine. And then after that, I'm going to do a couple of these baby kosher dill pickles. And I'm going to chop those up really fine. You could just use relish if you wanted to for this, but I think you get a little bit more texture if you chop up the pickles yourself, and I kind of like that in this application. But if you have relish and you want to use that, go for it. So next I'm going to pull the parsley back out, and I'm going to add some of that to this as well. And then lastly, I'm going to do 1 green onion or scallion. And I'm going to go ahead and do the whole thing. I don't mind the white parts of a green onion being raw in a sauce or something like that. But if you want to stop at the green parts, that's fine. So that goes in, and that's everything for the sauce. So I'm going to go ahead and stir this up now. I made mine really pretty spicy and acidic because that's what I like. So you can dial yours back however you want. But to me, this tastes perfect. I love this sauce. If you've ever had any sort of sauce with fried chicken that is self-described as zesty, this is the sauce that it's trying to be. So I'm going to throw that in the fridge and clean up a little bit here, and then I'll pull the chicken out, which is not frozen. It's only been in there for 10 or 15 minutes, so it's not frozen, but it's nice and cold, which makes the meat mixture more firm, which makes it easier to deal with. It's going to make the next step here a lot easier, which is going to be the breading. For the breading today, I'm going to do a classic 3-stage breading system, so flour, egg, and then breadcrumbs. I'm going to use panko today. For the breading, you could season any or all of these components, the flour, the egg, and the breadcrumbs. I don't usually, because I find that if the interior of whatever you're breading is seasoned well enough and you add salt at the end when things come out of the frying oil, I don't find that it really makes that much of a difference, and you kind of just end up wasting a lot of seasonings because there's inevitably going to be waste with the breading components. You can't really bread things without a little bit of excess, so you just end up wasting more than you need to, and I don't bother. Definitely the most tedious part of this process, but once you get in the rhythm, it goes pretty fast. It's not too bad. So once the nuggets are all breaded, it is time to fry. So I'm going to get my cast iron skillet out here, and it's also important, I think, when you're frying, make sure you have your whole kind of station ready. So make sure you have a landing spot for the fried food before you start. I'm going to put probably about ½ an inch of any neutral oil. I'm using vegetable oil here, but any neutral oil into the cast iron skillet. You only need about ½ an inch because we're going to flip these. When I'm frying like this, I like to flip my food a lot. Some people say that you should only flip your food once when you're doing stuff like this. I think it's fine to flip it a lot, and it just makes things a lot easier to kind of gauge where things are at. It takes a lot of the guesswork out of things because you can see exactly what each side of the food looks like in minute increments instead of just letting it sit there for 3-4 minutes, not sure if it's burning or what's going on. It It also helps because inevitably, at least on a gas burner, which is what I'm using here, the heat that comes out of a gas burner is not totally even. It comes out in kind of a ring. So there's inevitably going to be hot spots and cold spots in your oil, no matter how well you preheat it. Preheating for a long time and really thoroughly helps, but it's still gonna happen. So it's nice to just keep an eye on things and flip them frequently to see what's going on with all the food. And you can kind of see where the hot spots are, so don't be afraid to kind of move things around in the pan, move them from hot spots to cold spots and vice versa, however you see fit, depending on how fast things are cooking. All right, these ones have hit 150, so I'm gonna go ahead and take them out, and then I'm gonna keep going with my next batch. So I'm skipping forward to the last batch here that I'm doing. If they start to get a little bit darker as you go along, that's fine. That's pretty normal. That's just because there's more stuff in the oil to contribute to the browning. But these are good. These have reached 150 as well, so I'm going to pull them out. And those are done. So I'm going to pull my sauce back out here and get some of that. And that's it. That's how I make chicken nuggets. Super comforting, easy to eat, highly customizable. As long as you stick to the general formula here, they're gonna come out great. They're super easy. Everyone's gonna love them. So I hope you try these out sometime, and if you do, let me know in the comments how they came out. Thanks. Bye.